I'm Victor Dandridge, and welcome to Wednesday Forever, a look back on the iconic comic books that inspired a generation. We bring creators involved in the issues we're talking about to give us a real behind-the-scenes look at the work in question, the process of creation, and the story of how it got made. With me, as always, is Mr. Mike Dolce. What up, sir?
Good to see you, as always.
Good to see you. And today's installment, we have the legendary penciler, Mr. Daryl Banks, with us. It's my art dad, y'all, representing. Daryl, how are we doing?
We're doing great. How are you guys doing?
Oh man, fantastic! Absolutely,
living the COVID life.
Exactly.
La Vida COVID.
Exactly. Zoomingly, that's how we do it.
Zoomingly, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's how we're living. Okay, so obviously, huge fan of your run on Green Lantern. You've worked on a lot of different things over the years, but Green Lantern has been like the tip top, one of my favorites. And through your work in that, there's so many different things that you've touched on: the fall of Hal Jordan, the literal creation of Kyle Rayner, and perhaps one of the most contentious moments in almost modern comics, I would say. That's a talking point. So we're gonna talk about as much of that as possible.
Because
but
today's installment is
I know. Look, it's catching the green on the green screen.
Right? I know. It actually is just blending right into the Zoom.
That's
so anybody
kinda,
listening to us on podcast can't see this, but we're on Zoom for the video. And you can go to youtube.com/rogue matter for the video, obviously, if you're listening, if you want to see it. But my green screen is actually getting absorbed, like the Green Lantern is absorbing the green screen. So
this is brilliant.
It's actually kind of cool.
It is kind of cool, actually. Like, that's kind of brilliant. Now, that is a trade paperback that has been way long in the making. It is collecting
Emerald Twilight, right? Yeah. Emerald Twilight.
It is the first, how many issues is it of Green Lantern? It's from 48
on
48.
For the purpose of the podcast, we'll cover this whole thing, but we'll say Green Lantern 50 would be the I guess the official benchmark for us to
that is a very
to
important
work from.
One. That is the cover that you're looking at back there with Hal Jordan and the 10 rings. Now, you were doing some cover pieces before that, right? How did you get into working on Green Lantern as a series?
I remember when I first started with DC, it was fill-in stuff for Legion of Superheroes. They were this is the time that DC wanted to experiment with some new talent. They would just give a bunch of randos like myself, here, you want to take 4 pages of Legion of Superheroes in this annual, we'll see how you do. And they liked it, and they liked my turnaround time. And said, do you want to do some more? And it's kind of like, I was working in the shoe department at Marshall. Yeah, I want to do some
Al Bundy.
So,
yeah, that's right.
That'll be another podcast. My in the shoe department with a college degree. Yeah,
I'm an artist. What size do you wear? Lag there.
I remember I would do Lantern. Never the word would get back to them. It was kind of like, I have a series of sketchbooks of ring creations and costume ideas, just kind of chit-chatting. I didn't realize they're going, he does he? So the time came, I got the call, and the funny thing is I was having fun doing Legion stuff, but I got to draw my favorite Legionnaire Matter Eater lad. I know, weird, but the idea that he was so unique. The power to eat anything and not gain a pound. Of course, that means more to me now than it did when I was.
I was going to say, as we get older,
that's the story of my 20s. So.
Exactly. As a true hero now.
So, I remember when I was talking with my editor Kevin Dooley about things I was kind of looking forward to drawing in Green Lantern, and I still remember I was standing in the kitchen on the phone. This is I lived. I think that's when I lived with my dad back in.
We don't have to tell.
93.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's gonna age us all right there.
Yeah. No.
I said to the editor, I said, well, all the things you're talking about, big changes, as long as you don't kill Kilowog, I'm fine.
Ooh.
Those are almost my exact words. Ooh. And then it was like this awkward pause on the phone, because Kevin has a great sense of humor. He's he could do stand up. Pause. I'm like, hello. Well, about that, and I'm like, oh, this is that comedy. Yeah, okay. No, seriously, just as long as we don't kill Kilowog. I'm like, yeah, not only do we, but you're gonna do it. Like,
oh my gosh.
So of course, comics, that people don't stay dead, but just the sheer fact that that it happened, I'm like, he wasn't kidding. So,
I mean, this was a time of transition for a lot of DC characters. We've talked in a previous episode, the death of Superman. We talked about or hinted at the breaking of Batman, and I think honestly, the fall of Hal Jordan is probably the most lasting.
The trifecta.
Yeah, and literally the most lasting of those changes. Was that kind of in the air when you were coming in there? Did you see like that was part of the changes that were gonna be happening?
Here it is in a nutshell. The suits, who probably don't really know comics that well, maybe they do, maybe they don't, they saw what the crossovers from Death of Superman and Reign of Superman were doing to all their titles, and they were like, oh my god, look at these sales, books that aren't doing that well. And Green Lantern was selling terribly, according to my editor. And they're like, what can you do to make all these books stay selling like that? So the call went out, do whatever you have to do.
Wow.
See, in some ways, the best thing that can happen to a badly selling comic is just give it to a team and let them handle it. Think about it. We got Spider-Man because Amazing Fantasy was selling terrible. By the 15th issue, Martin Goodman didn't care. They said, Stan Lee, whatever
you want to do.
We don't care. And we got Spider-Man out of it. So when you let creative people just let them go and not micromanage, look what happens. Now keep in mind when Green Lantern, Emerald Twilight happened, this was the mid-90s, man. That was, I honestly thought at the time, like, none of this is going to last more than 3 or 4 months. Then we'll go back to how things were. But I remember this conversation I had with Ron Marz about that. We never approached it like a gimmick. Our philosophy was actually the same. Let's make comics that we feel like reading.
Yeah.
What do we like in the comic? What influenced us? And we'll put that in there. And so I think that kind of helped its lasting power, because we never approached it like, this is yet another 90s gimmick. Because if you roll back time to the mid 90s, that's all you saw.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now we did have a glow in the dark cover on issue 50, so
but you should know. Come on, that's necessary. That's not just a gimmick. That's smart marketing.
Yeah, it went with it. It did.
Yeah. Daryl, you talked about the 90s gimmick, right? And that's something Victor and I have talked a lot about in general in previous episodes. And but you said you didn't approach it like that. However, was the edict to eliminate Hal Jordan, or was that something that Kevin Dooley, like you said, the editor is basically saying, hey, we need to bring up sales. What have you got? And that was an idea that came from you and Ron, or was that something that they said, hey, here's our idea, now you run with it?
Well, first of all, Ron, I think people didn't understand what he really wanted to do with Hal, because what happened was, as we were working on it, it really gained traction amongst other DC creators. And I don't know about Marvel, but with DC, there's a tier system. Like, for example, Justice League has a lot more influence. That it's like offices, and they're literally on different floors. Like the Justice League office has a higher tier than Green Lantern, and Batman has a higher tier over everybody. Everybody. Batman was, I don't know about what it is now, but back then Batman was almost like he was a Marvel character. I mean, I remember whenever we wanted Batman to appear, my editor would talk about, there's so many systems of checks and balances and okay and approvals. It was like it was a crossover. Like with Hal Jordan's funeral, the edict was, well, he can be there, but he has to be like, he and the Bat family have to be away from everybody else, like maybe in a balcony or something. That's exactly what I ended up drawing. I'm like, wow. So what I'm getting at is, when we were doing what we were doing, it made the hires up notice. Like all of a sudden, Hal Jordan, his stock went up. Parallax, like, wow, this is interesting. Because, like I said, the reason we could do anything we wanted, because the book was tanking. It was an eyelash from cancellation.
Sure.
And so we thought, well, at least when I thought of Hal Jordan, I thought of Super Friends. I did, But then I have to remember, when I was in school, I remember loving the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams stuff. And even then, that was more character, but I didn't particularly care for what Hal Jordan was doing. I mean, boxing gloves and vacuum sweepers weren't doing it for me.
Yeah.
And so no, it was beautifully drawn. I mean,
Sure.
the best part of it in the industry. But just I thought about the powers. If I had that ring, that's not what I'd be making.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, could we combine the two? Can he be interesting and do interesting things? So the original plan was that, Hal would become Parallax, etc. The core would be destroyed, and then it would all come back full circle. Hal would be Green Lantern again. The core would be restored, etc. Ron Marz likened it to when you rent a car, you can drive anywhere you want, but you got to give it back the way they gave it to you.
Sure.
That was the goal. But what happened was they never saw it catching on the way it did. So the plans changed. I mean, even down to when you first see Parallax in issue 50, he doesn't have a cape.
That's
the cape came later because it's almost like when you're varsity, you get the jacket. They gave him a varsity cape. It's kind of like, well, we want to have him do more things, and so he needs a cape. You think about Dr. Doom and Magneto have capes.
Right.
Like, this Parallax guy's gonna need a cape. I'm like, oh, okay,
done.
A cape it is. So the thing is, it kind of threw off what we wanted to do, but then it was kind of good because that means he was a bigger deal for the company, which that happened.
That's got to be kind of an amazing sort of transition to get on a book where the lead character is kind of slacking in sales. You do things to up the ante for the character, but then literally swap him out for a brand new iteration, kill that, lead person off and kind of create a brand new status quo. Did you guys get like a lot of pushback once that seemed to be where it was going?
The biggest pushback, we had a lot of pushback for a lot of things, but it was more positive than negative. One of the biggest things was, believe it or not, I would say probably the second was turning Hal into Parallax. Number one dealt with a certain kitchen appliance.
Well, let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Green Lantern 54, ladies and gentlemen. The one, the only women in refrigerators issue. It's crazy because, okay, so full disclosure, I've known Daryl since I was like 15 years old. And I knew of this issue for a long time. And it was a long time before I asked you anything about it because I knew it was a contentious, issue. And I'm like, well, I know the artist that's involved in this. Should I ask him? I'm going to ask him. Can you tell us the story behind that infamous image and your take on how it was done, before you or by you and then after you? Did we lose him?
I think we're on.
Here we go.
Go ahead.
All right. With that particular issue, the Comics Code Authority was still in full effect, apparently, because the way I originally drew it and what we saw published were two different things. What the scene is, Alex was still dead. She was still in the refrigerator, but how I had drawn it was the refrigerator door was open, all the shelves were smashed, and her body was laying in the modified refrigerator. Because I don't know anyone who has a refrigerator big enough to accommodate a body, so I had to show what was done. Well, I guess somebody thought, oh, we can't show this dead body, so you're gonna have to close the door, like redraw it, put a door over it so that you can't really see her that well. And I'm thinking that's not a good idea, because if you can't really see in there, people are gonna think she's in pieces on different shelves, and that's exactly what people thought.
Yes,
that's exactly what people thought. So something that would have been probably forgotten 6 months later is now something we're still talking about in 2020 because of what happens when censorship back up.
That's got to be amazing.
The best of intentions, but...
Well, so whose idea was it to put her in the fridge to begin with? Was that something that Ron came up with, or you kind of mutually was like, what's a crazy place that we can put?
It was in the script. I think Ron was inspired by, it was maybe like a horror movie where it was someone was killed and put in a washing machine or something like that. So he thought, yeah, that's wow, that's brutal. And also, it was to make Major Force a bigger deal villain, especially since Kyle was going to be facing off against him. So now keep in mind, Alex was not some random thing like, oh, we hate women. and we're going to start killing them up. Ron got saddled with that term for a while. Don't know why. He was married, and I don't know if he had a daughter at the time, but yeah, he does now. Yeah, for the record, no, none of us hated women. Alex was created for one reason. Because Kyle Rayner has a lot of similarities to Peter Parker, intentionally, we felt that he needed an Uncle Ben. Alex was created to be Uncle Ben, full stop.
Right.
So we didn't want her shot, so by a burglar. So that's what we came up with. Well, I say we, it was in the script, and like I said, I drew it the way it was originally described in the script, and then the rest is history.
I actually like the refrigerator door over it. So full disclosure, I was a Marvel guy. I've been a Marvel guy. So even, I worked at Wizard Magazine many, many years ago. And they still would talk about Green Lantern, and you got to read this and you got to read this. So I actually had, they had what was like the library in Wizard, which was great. I don't know if you ever visited the Wizard offices back in the day, but the upstairs, there's a room. It was basically a walk-in closet, and it was just full of comics. And my editor or my boss was an editor. His name is Dan Riley, and Dan was like, "You got it. Yeah, Green Lantern's great. You got it." I just could never get into it. I really couldn't. I was always a Marvel guy, DC books, maybe some Batman. I just couldn't do it. For the podcast, I'm like, all right, you know what? Let me read it. And surprisingly, being older, I guess, it shocked me how much I was like really into it. And that scene particularly caught me completely off guard. And one of the things that it did by disguising it in the refrigerator, by having the door there, I did think the same thing. I'm like, did he chop her up? I'm like, no, I think he probably mashed her in there, but it was the shock value. And it was the what you don't see is what your mind can actually,
it's always worse,
fill in the blanks for you. So to
it's
me,
why Jaws was such an effective movie. You didn't see, what a shark looks like, but it worked on your imagination. Little kids are scared of the monster they think is under the bed.
Exactly. Exactly. So for me, and this is I'm telling you, fresh eyes. Last week I'm reading this. I'm like, oh, I can't believe they did that. Oh,
94, wow. Man. Like that was wild.
Well, that's the thing. And I think, for me, 93, 94, I'm a teenager, and we had Fabian Nicieza on to talk about X-Force #1. And he says, we were making comics for 14-year-old boys. I love X-Force #1 when I was a 14-year-old boy. Like that was exactly what it was. And I felt like what you guys were doing was bringing in was treating this, I think, more like comics are treated today. And so that kind of astounded me that it was like 93, 94.
Definitely.
Did you guys feel that? Like, were you approaching, you said you and Ron kind of took this, were you kind of approaching this like a horror movie or like an adult movie or something where it wasn't typical to what we saw in comics back then?
No, it wasn't so much how she was going to die. It's just that she was going to die. Mm-hmm. And it couldn't be, like I said, we couldn't have her shot by a burglar because, like I said, she was created. I hate to say it, but she was created to die. She was Uncle Ben. Yeah. I mean, I think at one point we even thought about making it an uncle. Like, no, that's too obvious. There's already too many similarities with Peter Parker and Kyle as it is. So we'll make it a girlfriend. So the thing is, what no one saw coming, either myself, Ron, or even the editor, that the fans really took to Alex. They loved her character. Yeah. So it wasn't so much that her death was shocking, is that it was the death of a character that people really started to like. And it was kind of like, people are really starting to like this character. I didn't see that coming. Did not see that coming.
Well, that's the thing.
It's not like she had this long history in the DC universe. No.
Right.
But that's the thing, by having this, and you actually, read my thoughts as I was reading this. I'm like, boy, you juxtapose this. First of all, again, we keep repeating that it's 93, 94, 95. Something that I'm a big fan of when I talk on my podcast, or when Victor and I talk, off camera too, is, a lot of people are like, well, we don't have this kind of hero. We don't have this kind of hero. We need more female heroes. We need more blah, blah, blah. And I read a lot of comics from the 90s. And to be honest with you, it makes me feel as if people just don't study their history. Right. Alex is a strong female character. She's a strong female lead. And I felt like she truly was a partner to Kyle throughout this entire adventure. So then to see her, die, and not just die, but like, if you had her just shot or stabbed or whatever, but in a gruesome manner, it did really, it took I can understand the fans kind of being outraged, but at the same time, I mean, that makes
good
it even more
storytelling,
impactful,
man.
right? Like all of a sudden, that's really something
that's great
hits you.
storytelling, because you cared. And I think the other thing that makes it so great is she wasn't treated in the same way as any of the damsel in distress / girlfriends of other heroes. Kyle told her right away who he was. She had thoughts about it, and they weren't exactly positive. She was like, this is stupid. What did you do? Like, why did you do this? That's a brilliant take on a character that is truly unique and original. I think it's amazing that your intention was to create an Uncle Ben, and inadvertently you created a Gwen Stacy. And it seems like that's the thing that people are responding to, because Gwen's death is probably the most, lauded in terms of the Marvel side of things. And this is a great comparison, to it.
And ironically, Gwen was killed because the sales were going down on Amazing Spider-Man.
Right. Like, ta-da!
Desperation, complacency. Right. But
so when it comes to the design of Kyle,
Gwen was around for a while though.
That's true. She was.
Yeah.
Had time. So when she died, it meant something. That's what makes Alex's death so phenomenal. She wasn't even around that long, and we're still like, oh, no. Like it mattered. When it came to designing Kyle, what was your thought process on putting that design together? It's so very of an era, but I can't even just say 90s era. Like that doesn't even quite fit.
It's not 90s era. It's got its own uniqueness to it. So talk about the design.
It was going to be if you could see the rejected designs. Now you gotta think mid 90s,
right?
Some of the rejected designs looked like he could hang out with Cable.
Shoulder pads and pouches.
He didn't have pouches, but he had armor, and the mask was a lot more elaborate. And my editor was like, no. He said, let me tell you something. We're going to keep this simple, and you will be glad I made you keep it simple.
I was going to say, you don't want to have to keep drawing that.
No. It's just, his outfit is borderline dated as it is, but what got rejected was just like, I wouldn't want to draw that anymore. Looking back on it. The funny thing is, the suit that we've come to know today is actually a combination of different rejected ideas. But it's like, we'll take the gloves and boots from this one, and the logo from this one. Not logo, that's another story. The graphic shape of this one, and put them all together and take part of the mask of this one. Because like I said, some of the rejected masks, it went all the way around his head, and it had a lot more unnecessary detail to it. The origin of the infamous mask, I was actually inspired by a Marvel character called Sunfire, the 70s version. How he originally. I always liked the fact that his mask went around his nose, but it didn't come close to the contours like Batman. It was more like kind of around his nose. Don't know why it was all.
Oh no, we lost him. Totally.
Okay. Talk about Sunfire's mask.
The influence that Sunfire had on Kyle's mask is that I love the fact that it was so unique that it followed the contours of his face, but not closely like Batman's, which was more like kind of around it. And I don't know, I can't explain why that was always fascinating to me, but in some ways that was the biggest influence on my mask, except of course it had to follow the angularity within the rest.
Yeah.
Right.
But
it works though. It works really, really well as a graphic image, especially in terms of a unique silhouette. That's kind of perfect.
But like I said, at some point maybe I'll put together maybe a sketchbook of the Kyle that wasn't, and why you should be glad about that.
I want that so bad.
I think so too. You kind of touched upon like what the offices were like, and what the what the conversations with you and Ron and with your editor. What else can you tell us about that era? Because I think, especially for me growing up, and Victor grew up in that era, it was such a different time. It was an artistic, explosion with the Marvel books, even with DC, then with Death of Superman and Bane and, comics in general. And I don't think today's audiences can kind of grasp just how fruitful, the early 90s really were in terms of, comics and art. And I mean, you can talk about music and movies too. I mean, just creatively, I feel like it was a really explosive time. What's your recollection of that era and that, burst of creativity?
The world was a different place. This was pre-social media. And I'm not going to always bash social media, but it was different. I think people are still people, but I just felt like I still maintain that even now it's still a very creative era. I just felt like the 90s, I think because of economic differences and also maybe people didn't have immediate ways to express negativity. It took more time. You couldn't just post something on Twitter. You had to write a letter,
Yeah.
So honestly, I think that may have played a part of it. But also the industry was different in that, if you had a convention that had maybe even as little as 500 people, Marvel and DC would be there.
Yeah.
You could show your samples, to the biggest companies in the industry on a regular basis. Now not so much,
Right.
But I mean, Marvel and DC were set up at Mid-Ohio Con in Mansfield. I mean, a matter of fact, I can't think of a show I went to where they didn't have a booth. That was amazing. Because, earlier on, I really grew to depend on not having to mail samples all the time. It's always better to get some, face-to-face contact with.
Which hasn't changed.
Right.
That hasn't changed.
It's always better. And also, I could also tell artists, I get that question, well, what should I do with my samples? And I'm like, number one, and it's hard to do nowadays, but try to get more feedback, not from other artists, because an artist will have an immediate sense. This is what sells for me. This is what doesn't. I talked to a lot of artists starting out, but I noticed it wasn't until let me think, who was it? DC, one of their representatives they sent around a lot. Mike Gold. His name was Mike Gold. He was great giving awesome feedback. And DC was also good for having a business card. Now, keep in mind, when I was starting out, Marvel was the goal.
Right.
DC was the backup, maybe. But Marvel, that's what got me up in the morning. And Marvel, I would, when I could get a straight critique that wasn't full of wannabe comedy, I didn't come away as knowing specifically what I need to improve on. DC every time, and the reps had suit and tie, business card. And I remember I was in Chicago one time at the old Chicago Con at Rosemont. And I remember standing in the hallway thinking, I'm going to end up with DC, aren't I? But then that's not terrible. But that's, we just connected a lot better.
That makes sense. Now, obviously, you growing up in Central Ohio like me, there was always that thought from outsiders that you had to be in New York or something like that in order to make a splash in the comic industry, and you're direct proof that you didn't. Was that really starting to change when you were getting in, or had it already kind of been established that no, you don't have to be in New York at the time to kind of get into the mainstream guys?
Well, see, I heard that all the time, that you needed to be there, and I thought that's a problem because I can't afford to travel and visit outside of Columbus. Didn't have the money to do that.
Right.
I think that's changed, but fortunately, thank God, I was able to make some inroads. But yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't a case where the industry had changed. Now it's true you could be from anywhere, but it definitely helped if you could be around. But I thought that's a problem because I couldn't.
Right.
But I remember when the Mid-Ohio Con moved from Mansfield to Columbus, that was a huge help because, like I said, Marvel and DC would come there. So I'm like, it's like they were in my backyard. I'm like, oh, I can drive downtown. That's 20 minutes. So, that was a big bonus. It was.
What do you think about today's artists? I mean, we kind of mentioned it too. They have Kickstarter as an outlet that, we never did, right? I mean, that was something that, I did stuff at Image Comics, and it was networking that got me there. It was doing a job for this guy who ended up getting to know this person, and then I got to know that person, and then, so on and so forth. And then eventually you get to somebody where you can have that warm contact as that warm referral, as opposed to just kind of shooting stuff in the dark. Today's artists don't even really care to work for the big two. And in many ways, sometimes the work kind of shows that in a way, right? Like it looks like stuff that's like, well, that isn't, the level of professionalism that I would love to see. And then there's some stuff in Kickstarter you're like, how's this guy not working, or how's this girl not working for the big two? What's your take on the Kickstarter scene as an artist?
There's always in the industry, Kickstarter, I feel really low because I think it's simple, almost as simple, it's simpler than you trying to raise funds on your own. Now, Kickstarter can be complicated. I've participated in them. I've never lost my own. I mean, thankfully, Harkin's Raiders, which was a recent World War II graphic novel I did with Ron Marz, that was Kickstarter. But I feel like, you mentioned about there, you look at artists and you wonder, how aren't they with the big two? Fortunately, now, I don't feel like people feel like they need that confirmation, like I'm not a professional unless I've worked for Marvel and DC. I think now industry itself and the genre of comics has grown to catch up with the rest of the world, where you think about The Walking Dead has nothing to do with DC or Marvel.
Yeah.
There are a lot of huge successful IPs or whatever that are independent and are just big, or if not bigger, and I think it comes down to, do you have a great concept that people love?
Yeah.
And are you professional about it? And it's kind of like, I don't think anyone's saying, oh, Walking Dead would be great if it was a Marvel property. Like, no one says that.
Yeah.
It's its own thing now. I'm surprised that Marvel didn't want to bring back Simon Garth, the living zombie or whatever, to try to kind of push that character.
Capitalize on it.
Well, they did do that Marvel zombie run. They did. And DC did the same thing too, right? I think they all jumped on the zombie bandwagon.
And Blackest Night, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the legacy of Kyle Rayner, that's got to be something that you're absolutely proud of. But did it ever get to a point where you disagreed with what the character had become?
Not really.
Okay.
I'm just surprised he's still around, honestly. None of us saw that coming. None of them. I mean, I figure 2 years tops after his introduction, and that was it. Then he'd be a trivia question answer. You know what I mean? But that the character is still alive, as far as I know, in 2020. That's amazing to me. And I think it has everything to do with, we never approached the character like a gimmick, even though he was born in the crucible that was the gimmicky 90s. We never approached him like that. And so I think that has a lot to do with his staying power.
I love it. Obviously, because of you, Kyle Rayner is my Green Lantern, so I am fully okay with that 100%.
I like the guy with the bowl cut just because it looked funny.
What, Guy Gardner? Really?
Guy Gardner?
One Punch Guy? Come on.
No, I just say he just looked funny to me. That's a solid bowl cut.
He's a necessary.
Daryl and I can't like him because he actually went to University of Michigan, and we're from Columbus, Ohio. We don't do that stuff. So
good point. Yeah. I get it.
Oh.
I get the rivalry.
That's right. We don't do that.
Well, Daryl, it has been
draw Kyle with an OSU jersey.
Yes, do that. Just cause.
Daryl, it has been an absolute pleasure. It was, and I'm glad we had you on. I'm glad Victor made the connection here because I got to then enjoy the Green Lantern run that so many people told me to read and consume, and now I get to do it. So just one of the many perks of this. Really do appreciate your time. You guys can check this out again. We are on all major podcasting apps. You can get us on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify. You can check out this video if you are checking out this video on youtube.com/Rogue Matter. Or you can check out all previous episodes on facebook.com/Rogue Matter podcasts. Join the movement. Go Rogue. I'm Mike Dolce. That's Victor Dandridge. Daryl Banks, thank you so much. And we will see you on another episode.
Thank you.
Of Wednesday Forever.